Welcome everyone. My name is Peter Howe and I'm the new principal at UWC Atlantic College, and believe it or not, you are part of a new tradition, which is to welcome parents when they drop off their children. We've tried to ignore parents for most of the 55-year history of the college, but it's becoming increasingly difficult, so we thought, why not welcome them and convince them that we know what we're doing? So I'm here with my leadership team who are sitting off to the side. Nick Lush, who's beginning his 28th year, I believe, at Atlantic College, who's the Vice Principal of Student Life. Kate Vince, who's the Vice Principal Studies, so in charge of academic matters. To Larry Roberts, who's our Director of Development. So what I wanted to make sure, all joking aside, is hopefully that you're all aware of the why of UWC. So Atlantic College is the original United World College, founded in 1962, but with the birth of UWC Isaac Japan, we now have our 17th college around the world, which is opening this year. So what began as an idea here in South Wales, very much during the Cold War, and as a sign of my age, increasingly, I'm one of the few people who was alive then in the room. Just born, though. I celebrate my birthday on Saturday, so I'm the same age as Atlantic College. But for those of you who did study history, you know 1962 was not the best year for world relations, particularly with respect for fear of a nuclear holocaust. And so the idea conceived for United World College, and it came out of the post-war work that Kurt Hahn did with NATO officers. And when that new alliance was brought together after the war, and they saw the friendships that were being formed between former enemies, that imagine if you brought together teenagers in their final years of high school to study together and build those bonds of friendship, which hopefully would be equal to, if not stronger than, nationalist ties. So that was the idea in a nutshell. UWC was the first school to have students from the Soviet Union study here, also from Maoist China. And so from the start, the idea was to bring students from both sides of a conflict together. And we continue that tradition today so that we bring conflict pairs onto the campus. We aspire to meet the demonstrated needs of our students so that money is not a barrier to the education that we offer here. So our mission as a movement is to make education a force to unite people, nations, and cultures for peace and a sustainable future. And it's our expectation that you too are part of this mission. And as we tell the students, this isn't something you do for 2 years. This is a lifetime commitment that you're making to this idea. But we as educators love the first part of this mission, which is to make education a force. How can we deliver a model of education which will leverage the deliberate diversity that we assemble on our campuses? So probably about 5 years ago, the UWC heads tried to come up with a model that would capture this in one slide. And the real breakthrough for us was what's at the heart of this circle, a deliberately diverse, engaged, and motivated community in service of the UWC mission. So we have refugee children here, we have millionaire sons and daughters, children's here as well. And by bringing them together in the classroom and through their activities, particularly service, what all of these students come to realize is a world that was at once abstract, and maybe they were following it on their Twitter news feed, or I guess with today's students on Facebook, where we have the fake news and the real news and every other type of news, is that things that were once abstract become real. I can completely empathize with the leap of faith you're taking in entrusting your children to us. Our son, my wife Sally's in the back, our son went to Pearson College in Canada. Our daughter went to UWC USA, so I feel your pain. I know how difficult it is to release your children into that environment, but I can tell you they will come back transformed, and you will be transformed by their experience. Now, our children have grown up on UWC campuses. I began my UWC career at UWC Adriatic in 2005. We moved to UWC Maastricht in 2012, and then we've just arrived here in March. So it wasn't as if my children weren't exposed to UWC students, but actually going there as a residential student. I remember our son at Pearson, they had a walk around a lake, 50 kilometers. It's the type of thing they do, you know, for fun. And he took that walk with an Iraqi student. And I think by the end, he realized how fortunate he was to be born in Canada and to have a stable family life, to live in democracies where there's freedom of speech, where there's universal health care, etc. But when he could actually put a face to a place, suddenly he cared a lot more about the injustices of the world and wanted to do something about it. So the model is informed by the UWC values, which are there listed on the left: international and intercultural understanding, celebration of difference, personal responsibility and integrity, mutual responsibility and respect, compassion and service, respect for the environment, a sense of idealism, personal challenge, and then finally action and personal example. But I hope what you recognize with a number of these values is their interdependency. We expect students to put community needs and interests on par or above their own individual needs. Delayed gratification, which in today's world is a very difficult thing to practice, is a necessary attribute. We also very much believe in experiential learning. In fact, we think everything is experiential. So you noticed in the ring of experience, we have service, active, as in physical activity, academic, social, personal, and outdoor. So the academic aspect of the program, the IB diploma that is so famous, is only one aspect of a UWC education, which is what makes it so demanding. But as brain research is now showing, the stimulated brain is the thinking brain, and to be stimulated in these areas outside of the academic setting actually leads to better performance in the classroom. Our students learn how to think. And in particular, they learn how to think outside their comfort zones. And when I'm trying to think of what separates a UWC graduate from other schools, I think it's that they learn to live outside their comfort zone for longer stretches of time. They're not always rushing back to safety. And I think that's where service in particular is very powerful, particularly when working with disadvantaged groups like the refugees in Cardiff or people suffering from dementia. That takes people out of comfort zones. And the students have to learn to occupy that space in order to serve. And I think that's a very powerful thing. So when I moved to Maastricht with my family in 2012, it was a new UWC. It had been a Dutch international school, and they had brought in residential students from around the world through the national committees. And I had to articulate precisely what it was to be a UWC. So this is where my UWC vision comes from. But I think at the heart was the special relationship between the staff and the students. So that was my first line, that all teachers contribute to the co-curricular and pastoral care programs through a core commitment to our mission, vision, and values, in which we place the supportive and trusting relationship formed with and between students at the heart of the enterprise. So hopefully all of you have had emails from your son or daughter's tutor. We have tutor time every week. It's a member of the academic staff who serves as a personal tutor for 8 to 10 students. And we make these tutor groups deliberately diverse as well, so students from around the world, second-year students and first-year students. And every week we come together as a group. We do the business of the day, what the announcements are. We talk about attendance, if that's an issue with our students, and then we talk about the world. and then we will go on to assembly on a weekly basis. As a community, we believe in the growth mindset. This comes from the work of a psychologist at Stanford called Carol Dweck, that intelligence, personality, and character can be developed, and a person's true potential is unknown and unknowable, and that teachers and students have much to learn from and with each other. When I first started teaching at UWC, I was so intimidated by the diversity. I teach economics. I had 15 students in my class, 14 nationalities. But when it came to development economics, and we were looking at Kenya, and we had a Kenyan student in the class, the power that brought to the discussion. I prepared a lovely case study with articles from the New York Times and The Economist, etc., handed it out to all the students, said, please read this, come ready to discuss tomorrow. And when they came back to class the next day, the Kenyan put her hand up and said, you know, it's not actually like this in Kenya. But of course, I had that Western perspective. And at the time, in 2005, there was a famine in the north, and she said, it's completely political. And she explained the tribal system in Kenya, and how the tribe in the north was in opposition to the government, and that's why there was a famine. And of course, everyone in the class responded to this idea, and we started talking about much more interesting things than traditional economic theory. But what you'll also notice on the reports, in addition to the grade we assign to the student, is that we also give you a sense of how we feel they're doing in terms of effort and engagement. And we keep it simple. They get a plus if they're exceeding our expectations, a slash if they're meeting our expectations, and a minus if they're not meeting our expectations. And the only students I will call to my office in terms of academic performance are the ones getting minuses. Because that whole point about promise and potential and not knowing what someone's potential is, we sure as heck are not going to find out what it is unless they put in a full effort. So that is our expectation. That's also reported for their service activities, their physical activities, their creative activities, so that you as a parent can get a sense of whether we think your son or daughter is putting in the effort that they should be to take advantage of this incredible community that they've joined. And then finally, we also believe in giving students appropriate and authentic responsibilities as part of their learning journey, allowing them to develop their courage and capacity to test the limits, to try, fail, and try again in a safe environment. 5 years ago was the 50th anniversary of UWC, and I tried to convince those at UWC International that the tagline we should have for UWC is, we teach your children to fail. But they didn't think that would sell an educational movement very well. But I think failure is critically important. We're all terrified of failures. And I think that emotional vulnerability that's necessary to fail requires safety. The students must feel that when they fall, they can get up. They won't be ridiculed. They won't be teased. They'll be celebrated for trying. And that's certainly the experience I've had in my 12 years in UWC. I'm new to Atlantic College, but that's certainly what I expect here. And then finally, that piece about authentic responsibility. Brain research now shows that the teenage brain is the maximum capacity brain. And so for all of us in the room, our brains have been shrinking since we were 20. That's the bad news. The good news is our brains become more efficient. But that, to me, is the greatest gift. This teenage brain that we have the opportunity to shape as educators at a UWC is a phenomenal responsibility and opportunity. So thank you for entrusting your students to us, your sons and daughters, and we're here to answer any questions that you may have. My top number one priority is to give students trust and authentic responsibility. I think a number of systems have developed over the years to protect students, and absolutely we have to meet health and safety standards, but there's a perception, or was a perception, amongst the student population that we didn't trust them. And I think that's critically important. So we suspended the Atlantic Diploma for this year because what I observed as a newcomer was There were 4 annual conferences, you know, the Sustainability Conference, the Peace Conference, et cetera, every year. But they were the same conferences every year. They were good conferences. But I want students to compete for that conference time. I want groups of students to come up with ideas for new conferences and convince us that should replace one of the ones we've traditionally done. So the space for student initiative will grow, and with that evidence that we put trust in them and that we give them authentic responsibility. Ultimately, there's another paragraph to this that I didn't bring today, and in fact I shared with the students this week, but I didn't share with the staff the week before. And that is, I'd really like to reinvent education for the 21st century. I mean, we're 17 years in, and it's pretty much same old, same old. Next year is the 50th anniversary of the IB diploma program. It was invented here, along with the Geneva International School and the UN School in New York. But 50 years later, it's the same academic program, and the world has fundamentally changed, not just in terms of geopolitics, but also in terms of technology, access to information, et cetera. And I think we need to develop a diploma that's much more interdisciplinary, project-based, team-based. So that's my aspiration, ultimately, is to use this as what I call a laboratory for learning. And we have a unique student population. No one has this level of diversity that we have. We raise close to £3 million a year to award on scholarships of demonstrated need. It's the biggest scholarship program of any secondary school group in the world. So we have socioeconomic diversity, religious diversity, ethnic diversity, national diversity. So what we develop here, I really truly believe can be shared out to the rest of the world. Well, hopefully to trust us, one, but obviously we need your support. I mean, Tulari's here because she's ready to take lists of people you know who are incredibly wealthy and might be interested in supporting UWC. I think something else that I know a lot of our students are unable to return home during vacation periods or over the summer. If you could open your homes to our students, that would be incredibly helpful. If you could spread the UWC mission, because when I joined the movement 12 years ago, they said at the time, it's the best kept secret in education, which I thought was amusing at the time. It now angers me that we don't have a bigger profile in the world of education. We do, universities around the world celebrate UWC. We had over 100 universities come to this campus last year to recruit our students. They know that we're producing an exceptional quality of person graduating from UWC. So talking up UWC, opening your networks for Tulari and her team would be a wonderful help to us. Well, my first question would be define good. As I said, I focus on effort and engagement, not results. I think good results are the unintended consequence of what we do here. I think some of the best universities are not necessarily the Ivy Leagues or the Uxbridge group. Those are meat grinders that chew up your kids. And I think in today's world, I mean, I'm hoping we're more or less, I have a 15-year-old, so I'm still in the same general demographic. Undergraduate university today is what high school was for us when we were a kid. I think completing an undergraduate, most of our students will go on to graduate degrees in almost every discipline that they pursue. So I'm a much bigger fan of small liberal arts colleges. The Netherlands has developed an exceptional group of English tuition university colleges. The US obviously created the idea of university colleges. In the UK, slowly, some of the universities are experimenting with this idea of liberal arts colleges. This idea of a focused concentration coming out of high school, the British model, I think, is one of the past. So what I can assure you is in my 12 years of UWC, my wife was a university counselor for 7 years at both Adriatic and Maastricht, and she can correct me if I'm wrong, but I honestly can count on one hand the number of students who didn't get into a great university following their UWC experience. Our students are highly sought after. We get a discount, so to speak, in terms of IB totals because they know how much more we ask of our students. So it's not a traditional IB school where you have to get 40 plus to get into these universities or SATs of a certain score. They really do generally value the type of student that we graduate. So the college testimonial about the person your son or daughter is worth a lot. So I have absolutely no doubt that we will be successful in delivering your son or daughter to the next stage. But I think another interesting thing for me, I came from a highly selective independent school in Canada before I joined UWC. And I remember being very frustrated because I had a parent-teacher meeting and I was explaining to the parents that I thought their son had a problem with anger management. I then found out the father also had that problem. But I went to a colleague, I was a new teacher, and I said, George, you know, I'm so frustrated by this parent meeting because I really had this thing to say about their kid. I think I know him well. And he said to me, Peter, what you have to understand is they've given you a package. They want you to deliver the package. You're not expected to open or tamper with the package, just deliver with the damn package. And for me, that's probably the thing I love most about UWC is we unpack the student. If we do our job well, every student here will have a crisis of identity. And that's a good thing because they are your child, but that's only one piece of their identity. Where they came from is another piece. What their religion is or their cultural group is another piece. But they leave here having a far stronger and better understanding of who they are. And that stability is what makes them so good at university because they don't waste time with that piece. Because of the safe environment, because they're secure in expressing who they are and figuring out who they are, they leave here as their own people. And that obviously is invaluable in my view. But that's part of what I love about UWC is challenging them on so many different levels and in so many different areas. You know, I get to run a physical activity, I get to be with a service, I have a tutor group. So in all of those areas, I teach economics as well, I mess with the students. And I really enjoy that. So yeah, I can assure you, if they have the effort and engagement, they will be successful, have many opportunities for university education. As in, well, it's Eston here, isn't it? That's the Eston. I'm new to the UK, so Nick and Kate lived through the Eston inspection last year. My timing's great. I come just as we get a glowing Eston inspection report. But all joking aside, I do think part of our job is to be better at developing networks in things like inspectorates. And convincing them of what we're trying to do. I mean, we had the good fortune in the Netherlands of being supported by the Ministry of Education. So although we were inspected by the Dutch Ministry of Education, they came to us to learn how to transform Dutch state education. So they sent down the director of secondary schools to study our co-curricular program. So I think it's very important that it's an open communication. I think it's fair to say that the Eston process led to school improvement here. We had never been inspected as a school in the first 53 years of our existence, and I think one can become complacent. And because you're used to everything being the way it is, you don't question some of the practices. So I think it's good to have that critical friend, but I would hate to think that we're not able to do what we aspire to do because of an inspectorate, and that obviously as an independent school we have a bit more latitude than a state school. They have a fair amount of freedom. I think, you know, Nick's point about social services inspecting us has led to a much more robust activities program than was the case in the past. So every There's 7 houses for the IB students, and each house is responsible for organizing a major weekend activity and minor weekend activity. Weekends are also the time when students are often planning their conferences and that sort of thing. We now have this beautiful sports hall, which opened in April, so great timing for you in terms of your kids arriving here, so that that's open, throughout the weekend. And a number of our services take place on the weekend, and some of our activities as well. Something we are trying to crack down on this year is attendance, both in the classroom, in activities, but also absence from the college. So we will have a process, and it'll be available on the webpage if you want your son or daughter to come home for the weekend, that there will be an absence request form that we're expecting you to fill out. And certainly if your son or daughter was thinking of going off to London with a bunch of friends, that would require your endorsement as well. But for me, being part of a residential school is that it's 24/7, and it's not like a weekday school and then on the weekends you do whatever you feel like doing. So as I said, we've developed a much more systematic set of weekend activities, but also the expectation that the majority of students will be here at any one time. Okay, well, I think part of this as well is that you get to know each other, and if you have any questions for the leadership team, please feel free to ask them, and of course I'm here as well to answer your questions. But thank you once again for coming and for entrusting your most precious things with us, which are your kids.